back with us again, James Delingpole. James, thank you so much for your time today.
It's a pleasure, Peter.
Great to have you. And obviously you can follow James. There is his Twitter handle, and Delingpole will bring up everywhere and anywhere where the Delingpole is, whether it's audio, you listen on the go, or whether you watch. I certainly enjoy it on Rumble, but I'll let the viewers and listeners choose their preferred platform to watch your many interviews. Now, James, I wanted to have you on, actually, as I mentioned to you before we went on, it was chatting to Dick at the Comcast event at the beginning of the year, and the issue of faith came up after one of the sessions over a few drinks. So I was curious and wanted you to come on. I know this is something you've talked about, but maybe if I can step back a little bit and ask you, what was your background kind of growing up in terms of faith and church?
I have probably the classic background for a certain kind of Englishman, let's say. So I went to a prep school where we had chapel 7 days a week, twice on Sundays. And then I went to a public school where there was a fairly similar arrangement. And I went to church at Christmas and possibly at Easter. But I think at the time I didn't really know it, but I was what I would probably call now a cultural Christian. I believed in the Church of England as a kind of institution, as part of the fabric of our heritage. You know, you had all the beautiful churches round about the country. You had the vicar judging the marrows in the village fete, and Morty Vicar, and the church was there for when you got married and when you got buried, when you got christened, and this was part of the sort of the ritual formality that binds our country. I still respect that element, although I think it's greatly diminished in our culture. But in my what you might call my normie days, I would have made a very good case for the cultural importance of Christianity and of the Church of England, just sort of giving a degree of shape and meaning to our lives. But what I wouldn't say I was an atheist. I know I wasn't an atheist, because when I was at my prep school, I remember arriving at my prep school. I would have been about 8, and you get dropped off by your parents, and then the headmaster and headmistress pretend to be all friendly like they do in front of your parents, and then your parents go, and then suddenly it's like being in prison. It really is like being in prison. You are shown to your dormitory, and your bed is not the comfy bed you had at home, where mummy kind of tucked you in and read you a story. It's this grim prison bed with this lumpy mattress and these scratchy blankets, and you're in a dormitory with these boys some of them are crying in their pillows and stuff. And I remember that first night, and what do you do? I remember saying my prayers, and because I'd seen my dad when I was very, very young. One of my earliest memories is sort of going into my parents' bedroom and seeing my father kneeling down by his bed every night. He said his prayers. And so for me, it was something that you did. So I said my prayers. And I wonder now, looking back, whether, a bit like, I think that I did myself a lot of good later on in life by being a cross-country runner at school. That you, when you develop your lung capacity and your stamina at that age, it stands you in good stead for later life. And in a way, I wonder whether my prayers put me on the right footing with God. And I suppose, did I say my prayers when I was at my public school at Malvern? Probably I did. But as you know, there is a massive, there is a sort of cultural cringe towards Christianity, which I now understand is the work of the devil. What if you're the devil, and the devil does exist?
Yeah.
If you are the devil and you've got this institution, Christianity, how are you going to undermine it? Well, I think if you attack it head on, what you're probably going to find is that people are going to resist and they're going to defend it. It's a bit like when big government pushes too hard. It's like I just done a podcast with somebody who's, sorry, excuse my digressions here, but I quite like a digression. I just done a podcast with Monica Smith, and Monica Smith did 23 days in solitary confinement in an Australian prison cell, because there's a punishment for resisting all the kind of vaccine mandates. And she was describing what it was like in the state of Victoria, and which of all the places in the world probably had about, all the places in the West had about the most draconian COVID regulations anywhere in the world. And she said that there was a protest outside the state parliament in Victoria, in Melbourne, which attracted 600,000 people. 600,000 people. The population, I think, of Victoria is 6 million. So when you discount all the people who are too young to attend or too old to attend, she reckoned it was probably about half of the half the state was up in arms against it, because Dan Andrews, their wicked premier, pushed too hard. And I think it's the same when the devil knows this. The devil's a clever fellow. So he knows that if you want to undermine Christianity, you don't attack it head on. What you do is you make it this sort of slightly embarrassing, uncool thing, and you infiltrate the church by making sure that you get priests, clerics, who don't really, they think that Christianity needs updating. That Bible stuff, it's so old fashioned. It's just like they're not very, very progressive on issues like homosexuality, and really you need kind of gay marriage because the Bible was happened a long time ago, and we've moved on since then. And also you need, instead of psalms and robust hymns written by Charles Wesley with jolly tunes, what you need is people strumming guitars, and you need to rewrite the service book. So instead of having the old liturgy with its robust, sonorous, and beautiful language, you replace it with this touchy-feely, limp toe rag, limp dishcloth stuff that designed to make you feel awkward and embarrassed, and to take you away from the numinous, from the spiritual side of things, which is the only side that really, in fact, what you do is you keep the religion, but you remove God.
Yeah.
You remove the key element. And one of the things that's really excited me about my sort of discovery or rediscovery of Christianity is to realize that the supernatural element, the element which has largely been written out of Christianity in our secular culture, is the stuff that really matters, because God is real. God created the earth. I mean, despite what we're taught at schools, we're taught evolutionary theory is evolutionary fact, and it just doesn't stand up when you look into it. So my journey of faith has been rediscovering that God is real, that angels are real. Two of my followers, whatever you want to call them, have seen angels. I know demons are are real. There's a friend of mine who can actually see the demons feeding off people. They harvest our emotional energy. Once you understand that this earthly world, the materium, is merely a kind of earthbound reflection of what is happening above in the spiritual realm, only then do you really understand the nature of reality.
Yeah. Can I agree. And when I talk to atheists, I say, I wish I had your faith to believe in nothing when you see the complexity of the world.
Yeah,
it's
that's a good one.
Yeah. But can you, I'm assuming that when you left school, you kind of left that behind. I'm hearing kind of your faith, as in prayer, that ritual was part of the education. But when you finish education, you left that behind, or did you keep some of that, or is it
more or less
abandoning it all?
More or less. I had an interesting period where when I had children, and every parent goes through this. How to get your child into a school that is not totally shit.
Yes.
That is not going to break the bank. So in the early days, most of us can't afford private education for our children. I mean, I did go private later on, but by various means, sort of bursaries and helpful relatives and things like that. But you think, okay, well, got to get them into it. Ideally, a church. I can't do a Catholic school because I'm not a Catholic, but Church of England primary, and quite a lot of Church of England primary schools know they've got you by the balls. They know that this is a way of enforcing church attendance among parents. So then it came down to, well, most churches are really grim places, and I mean, talking back then, the modern equivalent of talking about Zelensky and climate change, that they've got all these values which have nothing to do with Christianity. So you think, well, and some of them have really long services as well, really, really boring services. Luckily, we had sort of family connections, traditions with a fantastic church called Chelsea Old Church on the Embankment. It was Thomas More's church, I think. I mean, lots of people have worshipped there, and it had a really good vicar called Peter Elvey, and Peter Elvey and his marvelous assistant Susan Gaskell, who was this. She liked to sort of have a glass of champagne at 11 in the morning and with a few cigarettes. She was proper old school, and the congregation was really quite pucker. And this appealed to my snobbery apart from anything else. And I like the fact this is an old church, and I think it used the Book of Common Prayer, I think, and so on. But they had this great children's service. And in the middle of the service, they had a really good dressing up box, and if you were lucky, your children would be selected to act out whatever the day's scripture, the day's reading was. And I started taking part in the organizing this, and sometimes I would do some of the quizzes where you'd quiz the children on what had been said in the story, and testing them and throwing mini Mars bars to the child who that got it. So I quite like this. I didn't become a god botherer.
So this was your first. What this me 15 years ago, whatever. This is your first step back into the church, is it?
Yeah. Exactly. But it sort of reminded me of some of the things that are good about the church. But more, do you know what? At the time, I justified this to myself more on. I remember going back to my school, but back to Malvern, and talking to one of the few staff that remained from my period there. He was a history teacher, and he was describing to me how children would start at 13-year-olds would arrive at the school, and none of them would know basic things like the biblical stories. which I think are one of the bedrocks of our culture. And this really matters to me. I mean, regardless of what you think about the spiritual element, we are a Christian country. Our literature, for example, which is possibly our greatest artistic speciality, if you like. Our literature is steeped in religious learning. I studied The Dream of the Rood. Anglo-Saxon poetry is all about Christ and the cross and stuff, and then you go through to Chaucer and Shakespeare and so on. Milton, obviously. They all have an understanding. They all write on the assumption that their audience knows things like the water into wine and all the stories. And I found it shocking that I was living in a world where this stuff had been written out of our history. Probably the generation after mine is the first generation in 1,000 or more years that doesn't understand the basics of the Bible, and that was shocking. So I saw it as a cultural thing. I thought it was part of my children's education, number one. And probably also at the time, I believed something which I do not believe now. I thought that the great clash of the great war, if you like, was between Christianity and fundamentalist Islam. I bought into the whole, I didn't realize that almost all alleged Muslim attacks are actually false flag operations masterminded by the dark side. So I thought, it's Lord of the Rings time. There is evil out there, and we can see what the evil looks like, and we've got to know what side we're on, and we're on the side of Christian, Judeo-Christian culture, as I would have called it, called it at the time. So I saw it as a cultural thing rather than as a spiritual thing.
So there came a point, I want to pick up on that cultural Christianity near the end, because it's something I've been pondering about a lot, listened to a lot of commentators. But for you talked about going back to church. Was there a wake-up point, or is it gradually when you begun to realize actually the Bible is true, God is real, and that then requires a response from me?
That came later. So about just before the sort of the fake pandemic craziness.
Pandemic.
I got very invested in Donald Trump. I thought that Donald Trump was going to save us. I don't think that anymore. I don't believe there are any white hats. I think they're all compromised. But at the time, I sensed that something was very, very, very wrong with the world. And I think a lot of people who go down the rabbit hole have this traumatic experience in some way, whether it's somebody who's had all their money taken away by the banks that they thought banks were respectable, or whatever. My own trauma was seeing the leadership of the free world, as I believed it was then, stolen in real time by skullduggery of such breathtaking overtness. I mean, it was so blatant. And I saw the entirety of the media, which I'd thought of as a journalist of 30 years. I thought, well, the media's job is to speak truth to power, and all the things that Toby Young still believes in. I thought, well, the media will never allow this to happen. That they're going to point out that all this blatant stuff, ballot papers being discovered by the lorry load, filled in and stuff, and footage from the various polling counting stations and so on. Anyway, it didn't happen. I saw that the mainstream media, which I'd trusted to tell the truth, was gaslighting everyone into believing that actually this was normal, and that this senile, incontinent crook in the pay of communist China and stuff, who'd never even gone on the road because his handlers couldn't bear to let such a liability anywhere near the electorate, that somehow this guy Joe Biden had won. And worst of all was all the people I'd thought of as my comrades in arms, the people who I thought of the band of brothers who were going to fight with me in the foxholes alongside me, and I could trust them to guard my flanks because we were all in this one together. Yeah, great battle for freedom, for truth. They were participating in this lie. And it was a real. I was desperately naive. I think most of us are, though. I think because we're subject to this brainwashing process from the earliest stage. Our parents who know no better tell us, and then our schools brainwash us, and then the media brainwashes, and the entertainment industry brainwashes us. So it was and I went through this period of about 3 months where, I almost had a breakdown, actually. And then you start looking into various other things, trying to make sense of the world, and you realize that the whole world is a lie and an illusion, and that there are really, really bad people in charge. And that is the stage where you go from red-pilled to black-pilled. You think, we are totally stuffed. But then, parallel to this, there were various awakening moments. So I started noticing in my podcast that I was starting to talk about that I started mentioning God more, and I was starting to talk about being on a mission from God. And I said it half flippantly, but I began to realize that actually, no, I wasn't saying this flippantly at all. I remember doing a podcast with Jamie Franklin from Irreverend Pod.
Yeah.
And Jamie said to me, I've noticed that some of the language you've started using is really quite, religious, Christian in its overtones. And I thought, yeah, you're right, Jamie. What's going on here? There were a few other things, because there wasn't a saw-line moment of sort of blinding realization. It wasn't as simple as that. I remember I did a podcast with Jerry Marzinski, the psychiatrist from Arizona, who'd worked a lot with paranoid schizophrenic in high security hospitals and prisons. And it's worth listening to the 2 podcasts I did with him. But Jerry, unlike most psychiatrists or prison shrinks who prefer to dose their patients with chemical koshias and just like, turn them into zombies, he actually took the trouble to listen to what they were saying about the voices in their heads. And he discovered there was remarkable consistency. And what the voices in their heads were saying was the sort of thing that demons would say, because these things are demons. And he found that the most effective treatment of these demons was the 23rd Psalm. So I thought, well, yeah, that's interesting. I get kind of voices in my head, not demonic voices, but I think they are demonic voices. But I think when you say to yourself things like, God, you're such an idiot. I bloody hate you, bastard. You stupid. What? I hate you. You really be better off dead. You should die. I hate you. I used to get that all the time, especially after a night's drinking or whatever and stuff. So I started learning the 23rd Psalm, and then I learned Psalm 91, and then I thought, I quite like these Psalms. And what I found was that the Psalms made me based, for want of a better word. The Psalms are a great solace. And it's not without reason, I think, that novice monks, the first job when they joined the monastery was to learn the Psalter. They learned the whole lot, all 150 of the Psalms. the enemy, the forces of darkness, the Russell Brands of this world, they use words. They use words like spells, and the dark side uses spells. We Christians too have spells, but we don't call them spells because that's what they are. They are a form of magic, but they're holy magic. Yeah. And when you say the Psalms, it gives you put on the whole armor of God. They protect you. They protect you from the dark forces. And I mean, there were other moments too. I found that I would have moments where I didn't have a voice saying, "I am God, and thou art my chosen one to go." But I do very much feel, really feel that I've been given a mission, a purpose, and my purpose is twofold. It's one, to red pill people, and one to white pill people. And I feel really comfortable about that. I don't feel at all embarrassed about. I don't feel at all embarrassed about talking about Christianity when I go out into the world, when I'm hunting, for example. And it's, the hunting, the fact that I go hunting pisses some people off, and I say to them, okay. I wrote a piece about this on Substack once. I say, the world is controlled by Satanists who sacrifice children to the devil, and you're worried about fox hunting. Get real. Get it. I think anyone who's against fox hunting is not actually fit to be properly awake, because they don't get it. They don't get that the war on hunting is part of the forces of darkness's war on humanity generally, on us ordinary people. If you saw how communities are bound by rural communities, the economically they're bound, socially they're bound. The qualities that they instill in the people who do it, courage, camaraderie, a love of the countryside. We even love the fox, for goodness sake. I mean, that because the fox is a key part of the deal, and we respect the fox. We like the fox. The fox is our quarry. Okay, he's our enemy in the sense that he trashes chickens and stuff. And if you've seen a hen house after a fox has been in there, it's carnage. But everything's going on in the world right now is a war on humanity, and we are created in God's image, and that is why they do it. That is why they divide us in all sorts of ways, whether it's through religious schisms, whether it's through sort of things like animal rights, the division between, artificial entirely, I think, created by propaganda, between meat eaters and non-meat eaters. Almost every division in society is created by the forces of darkness to divide. I think left to our own devices, we'd all get on really quite well. We wouldn't have wars. We definitely would not have wars. Wars are all engineered by a tiny, tiny, tiny satanic class. Where am I going with this? I can't remember what the real question.
Actually, on the Psalms, you talk about the Psalms, reading the 23rd Psalm, 91st, and others. You've just started a series on the Psalms. Gavin Ashton, I think, was the second one. I watched that. That's intriguing, because the only other person, I think I've seen Alistair Williams do kind of looking at different parts of the Bible. It's something that's frowned upon as you said, frowned upon in the UK. It's not the American right, where people are fairly open about faith, whether it's real or not. So what led you to actually going through the Psalms and talking about it? Because that's quite a step change. It puts you out there, makes you vulnerable. It's outside your lane, all of that stuff.
Yeah. They came about me like bees, which are extinct, even as the fire among the thorns. How could you not respond to language like that? I mean, the language of the liturgy is up there with Shakespeare. It was written about the same period. I mean, I just quoted I hope accurately, the psalm I'm just learning, which is Psalm 118. The one I've been using is, I started out using the King James versions. The version of Psalm 23 I learned is KJV. But then a lot of the psalm translations in KJV borrow quite heavily from Miles Coverdale, who was writing about he was translating them about 50 or 60 years earlier. And there's a greater charm in his translations. And so those are the ones used in the Book of Common Prayer, which were the psalms I learned at prep school, or the psalms we sang at prep school. And I remember at school, and I was thinking, why are we singing these dirgy? I mean, okay, some of the hymns are bad enough, but the psalms, you didn't really know what the point of them was. They were just. But looking back, I'm glad that that I've got these phrases lodged in my head, which I was. It was like having a kind of Proust Madeleine moment where I came back to learning these psalms and recognizing these familiar phrases which I'd resented singing at school, or sort of croaking at school. You know, the fowls of the air and the fishes of the sea, and whatsoever walketh through the paths of the seas. O Lord, our governor, how excellent is thy name in all the world. That there was a point, and I doubt even our music, the head of music, who was also the school's, one of the school's benders, you know, who used to molest us. I'm sure was the case in most prep schools. Everyone had a kind of molesty master, and I doubt he was much of a Christian, not least because he introduced with relish the alternative service book of the 1970s, that horrible yellow-bound thing with the horrible modern liturgy. So he was probably part of Satan's mission. But anyway, unwittingly, he inculcated us with the language of Miles Coverdale, which has stayed with me since. The Psalms are, as I mean, I'd love to be able to speak Hebrew and read them in the original Hebrew, but certainly in their translation by Coverdale and the team that put together the King James version, they work as literature. They also work as a form of solace, because what they do is tell you that however bad things may get, God is there for you. They're kind of like also like an instruction manual. It is better to trust in the Lord than put any confidence in man. It is better to trust in the Lord than put any confidence in princes. I mean, if you learn those two lines, in fact, one of them would do, it be a very good manual for living out your life, because you wouldn't be putting your trust in Russell Brand. You wouldn't be putting your trust in Donald Trump. You wouldn't be trusting. You just remind yourself that the most important thing is God, and the better your relationship with God, the better life you have, because God works his holy magic. I mean, all Christians can testify this. All real Christians know that this stuff is not imaginary. That there are ways that God helps you. That the supernatural, the crazy stuff works, and the Psalms are a daily reminder of this. And so, if you can ideally learn them, because you inhabit them more thoroughly than you do when you're reading them. I mean, I have a treasury of poetry in my head as well. I learned a representative poem by pretty much all our great poets. I mean, I don't practice them as much now because I'm too busy reciting the Psalms in my head. But when you learn poetry, with your stumbling process by which you memorize these poems and you get it wrong, you actually go through the process that the poet went through when he was writing this poem. And in the same way, I think when you learn the Psalms, you you inhabit them, and they inhabit you, and that is the lovely thing to have running through you every day.
Yeah, because there are numerous times in the Psalms where it says, "Tell my soul, speak to my soul," and it is a framework. It changes your focus, not only the Psalms but Proverbs, a guide for living, and whatever you're going through personally. That is what gives you hope. And you're right. If you soak in that, you're infused with that, then that affects what you do.
They have direct practical uses as well.
Yeah.
For example, Psalm 91, which is a warrior's psalm. It's thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day, nor for the pestilence that walketh in darkness, nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. This, I understand, is the prayer recited by the U.S. Marine Corps when they go into action, and probably many other soldiers as well. And it protects you. It protects you. So that's a good psalm to have up your sleeve.
You talk about confidence in what the Bible teaches, about taking that on, and that becomes who you are. I'm curious because when I look at the Church of England and doubt and how that fits. I mean, I grew up a pastor's kid, Baptist church. It was certainty. It was absolute. You knew what you believed. Then you look at the Church of England and kind of there's a lot of fear of offending, and I guess doubt becomes a virtue. I'm intrigued with that, where I like the absolute uncertainty that parts of the church bring to the Bible. It is the word of God, it is true.
Yeah.
Where the Church of England seems to struggle with that sense of truth.
Well, I don't think it's just the Church of England. I think that certainly the Roman Catholic Church, certainly the Church of England, probably most churches have been infiltrated by the forces of darkness. Obviously, as you would. I mean, if you were devil, it would be your key target. The Pope is the anti-Pope. The Pope is definitely batting for the wrong team. So is Welby, and yet. I'm quite enjoying the fact at the moment that I am a sort of floating voter, in that notionally I'm C of E, but I find much that is good in the Calvinists I speak to, and in the Catholics, particularly the Latin Mass, and and it enables me, I think, to speak to all Christians rather than. I mean, I love the Orthodox Church. Oh, wow, I'd quite like to be an Orthodox monk on Mount Athos. But
we could do that together. That'd be good fun.
Be fun. It saddens me that there are these. You see it on my Telegram channels. The Baptists and so on, and the Calvinists and whatever. They think that Catholicism isn't really Christianity because they accuse them of worshipping Mary and saying prayers to saints and stuff, and it's a throwback to the Emperor Constantine. He never really converted to Christianity. That was just fake, and that what he did was he borrowed all the kind of pagan goddesses and all this. And I'm thinking, God, I don't want to speak for God. But I have a feeling that God is looking at these schisms and going, look, guys, lighten up, will you? You're all doing pretty much the right thing. I don't believe that he is so picky that he is saying, well, the Catholics, they are pagans. Look at the Asherah pole they've got standing in the middle of St. Peter's Square. How can they not? I don't know. So the other thing I've noticed about becoming a Christian is that the upside is the church, the broad church, the joy you get talking to Christians about Christianity. So so the other day I went riding. And you're going to be on a horse talking to people for the next couple of hours if you're out on the hack. And some of them are boring and some of them are not. So met these people, and two women up from London. And I said to one of them, "And what's your name?" And she said, "I'm called Mariam." I said, "Mariam? Oh, that's an interesting name. It sounds a bit Ethiopian." He said, "Oh, really? Why?" She said, "I'm not Ethiopian. I'm originally from a Muslim background." I said, "Oh, right. Yeah, well, Mariam, yeah, I've heard it a lot. It's sort of the Copts, I kind of like the Coptic church. It's really old. And I didn't mention that they've got the Ark of the Covenant somewhere hidden in Ethiopia. But I said, yeah, I'm really interested in Christianity. It's just, I think, endlessly fascinating." She said, "Oh, are you?" I said, yeah. Can't get enough of it. And she said, I was baptized 3 months ago." And I said, "Oh, wow." So the whole of the rest of the ride, we had this great talk about God. So that's what I love about Christianity, the fellowship. The downside is that you get lots of really annoying Christians who do things like telling you, hinting that you're not really Christian enough, or correcting you on sort of doctrinal inaccuracies. I've got views that I know are heretical. I'm not going to talk about them here because I don't want to get stick from. But look, I think that you listen to the words of Jesus, you follow the Psalms, you've got the creed to keep you on the straight and narrow. Go to church if you can. Take communion if you can. We're all on the same team, I think.
Yeah. Can I pick up just to finish on that cultural Christianity, which has been in my head for a couple of years, watching different commentators, politicians, probably more stateside. They yearn for those days whenever Christianity gave a moral framework, I guess. And they seem to want the idea that Christianity brings without having the person of Christ. Yeah. And I enjoy watching conservative commentators struggle with that they want this, but they don't. And it's like something is so attractive, it looks good, but yet that relationship with Jesus, that actually holds them back.
Yeah. I mean, like, didn't Tony Blair claim to be a Catholic once?
Yep.
I have my suspicions about other conservative MPs who go big on their Catholicism. In fact, my severe doubts about any of MPs who play the Christian card, because I think they're all basically working for the other side. I think what we saw during I hate to use the word COVID like it was real, but what we saw was the puppets of Satan just doing the devil's work to the people, trusting people who thought these were their elected representatives. I don't think that look, it's not for me to judge, but I don't think there are many MPs, any politicians anywhere in the world who are not going to burn in hell.
But what does that, because I think Thierry Baudet was with you a while ago and he talked about the NatCon conference, and he was very dismissive of that actually being conservative and not talking about the big issues. But actually what I took away looking at some of those was that Christianity no longer plays a part in those circles apart from lip service. Is that a fair enough assessment, or disagree with that?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, NatCon is definitely another example of the devil at work. Yeah. I mean, name me an MP, a politician of any hue, who talks about real Christianity as opposed to ersatz Christianity. Yeah, they might like the values. They don't really. But none of those values involve actually believing in God. I mean, can you imagine if you asked them, any of them, about how the world was made? I can't. All they'd be doing is thinking of the headline that X believes that, lol, the world was made by God. Come on, everyone knows that evolution is how, there was Big Bang, and then there was this. Apparently, Charles Darwin tells us, one of the greatest Britons, as named by the BBC, so it must be true. They wouldn't go there. They couldn't cope with it.
Oh, 100%. I had Eric Metaxas on once talking about the death of atheism, and it's a phenomenal book going into none of this can be luck and chance. None of it, the complexity of the world. Just final quick question. What about pushback on you? Because you're not supposed to have a series on the Psalms on your channel. That's just not done here. Kind of what pushback have people said, James, get back to discussing COVID the last 3 years?
Oh, it's no. Do you know what? I don't get much of that. I get more. I get the occasional commenter who has clearly been following me for a very long time in my normie phase, where I believed in things like the war on terror stuff, and they're looking at me now and thinking, this guy has lost the plot. He thinks it's a conspiracy, and what's more, he thinks the devil's kind of running the show. He needs to, hasn't he read any history books? Surely he knows that it was the North Vietnamese that started the Vietnam War, with their torpedo boat attack on the US fleet. And so their reference points are reference points of those trapped in the beast system. All the history books are written for the devil's party. All the politicians work for the devil's party. It's everywhere. It's all. Look, it says in 2 Corinthians, doesn't it, that Satan is the god of this world.
Yeah.
And unless and until you understand that, you are missing the biggest piece in the jigsaw. You're never going to get it. You can be right about vaccines, that they're bad for you, and you can be right about the importance of bodily autonomy and stuff. You stand up all these principal things, but until you understand that this is a war between good and evil, which has taken place since the beginning of our time on this earth, you really don't get it at all, frankly.
100%. That is the piece of the jigsaw people have to get to understand everything else. James, I appreciate you coming on. As I said at the beginning, I've been wanting to have this conversation with you and unpacking. So thanks so much for coming along and sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed talking about it. Part of my holy mission from God.
Thank you. And I think the last guest you had on the Delingpole, just for the viewers and listeners, if they haven't seen, I think was Abby Roberts. And we had her on after she got arrested for swearing. And Abby is a force of nature. So if people want to catch the latest one, it is Abby Roberts on the Delingpole, everywhere and anywhere. So James, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Peter.